Alright, so I want to make a video updating everyone as usual, as well as getting to some other important stuff. We had a really big story, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, so I want to talk a little bit about that. So getting right into it, Canada's up to 70,387 confirmed cases, 5,050 dead. Alberta 6,345, 118 dead. 45 new cases yesterday. So again, the case total is continuously, the curve has long flattened. We still have, what, 12 people in the ICU in the whole province, 73 in total. Again, the hospitals are nowhere near, like I say, nowhere near overwhelmed. Again, there's probably like the U of A hospital, I assume, could probably take on every one of the people that currently need to be in the hospital from it. And again, that's probably just one hospital, let alone all the other ones that could do it. So, um, the point that I keep bringing up is, again, they continuously keep shifting the goalposts. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more from another story, but they keep just shifting the goalposts just so they can justify the keeping things locked down. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like I said, the key number to look at that I brought up yesterday going forward is the active cases. Now, the active cases yesterday was, I think, just over 1,500. So we went down by about 150 active cases yesterday, which is very good. And again, we've been going down pretty much every day. I mean, I wish Canada showed more numbers. Maybe they do. They just don't update it here on this page. Um, but again, like I asked for the keep it locked down or we're all gonna die crowd, just how low are things going? Like how the curve is, it's reverse flattened, like it's going down. How good are things going to have to get before you say, yeah, this isn't worth it anymore? Now, most of those people are the kind of people that nothing's going to satisfy them, like literally nothing. So that's the big problem when it comes to those people. But I want to talk about some other stuff, and then I'll keep going here. So yesterday, uh, the Trudeau government says businesses who do not fight climate change will not get new support money, pushing a corrupt money grab that has no impact on the environment. Again, we know that all the stuff that they've done has no effect on the climate. Again, we know that. I've made plenty of videos about that. A carbon tax does nothing. We know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, and it doesn't make any sense. So the goal of these climate policy is to just it's another way that the government can tax people, and it's another way that they can gain more power. That's all it's about. Again, if they actually cared about the climate, they would spend all their time and effort trying to convince China and India to cut down on their emissions. Canada is such a small percentage of world emissions, it doesn't matter. And don't give me that BS, oh, would you lead by example? Like, that is a stupid argument, like, argument. Uh, for the simple reason that, for example, like the Paris Accord does nothing to prevent China from increasing their emissions. Like, again, if you actually care, you would you wouldn't cripple our own industry just letting other countries just fill in the gap. Again, you have all these idiot environmentalists in Alberta and in Canada in general that are shutting down our oil sands. But guess what? All they do is just import oil and natural gas from other places to fill the gap. Again, wind and solar is not the future, at least in our lifetimes. Maybe down the road, the problem is the renewable technology is still incredibly inferior and much more expensive, even if it isn't inferior than the current way things are going. So again, if you support wind and solar, you support something that's much more inferior. You're going to have blackouts on a regular basis. Again, how well is that going to go when it's minus 30 in Alberta? Again, just think about that. We had 2 weeks straight this year where it was below minus 30. Guaranteed the power would have went out during those times because the grid almost shut down, let alone the wind and solar. Again, it wasn't very sunny for most of those days. It was windy, but it wasn't windy every day. So, and that's the thing too. People say, well, what about batteries? Again, the battery technology is terrible. It's absolutely pitiful to the point to where you can't just store power and be like, yeah, I'll use it later. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Um, so basically, getting back to this main point here, this person responds by saying, in my 43 years of lending at a bank, we could not make a loan on the condition the client was doing something to fit our agenda. It's called TID selling and it's illegal. So how come the government, again, the government does tons of things that the average person can't do, infinite amount of things that's illegal for the average everyday citizen, but why can the government do this? What makes it okay? Like imagine if a right-wing government was in power and said, yeah, we're not going to lend you money. We're not going to lend religious institutions money unless they're just Christians. Like imagine the uproar that there would be on the left. Like it'd be, oh, Islamophobic, ooh, racist, all this crap. But yet when they do it, it's perfectly fine. And there's not even a legitimate reason for it. There's not a legitimate reason for it. Even if it is, you don't get to do that. That's not how it works. The only way I believe that you can deny lending someone money is if they're taking the money, for purposes of illegal activity. I would assume, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a banker, but I would assume that is the only exception. And that may not even be an exception. Again, I'm not a banker, but again, this person is saying directly, and it doesn't make any sense too. Like, show me a time in history where the government has been able to do this. So anybody saying, "Oh yeah, it's perfectly on board, they can do that." Again, show me an example in history of us doing it. Like, I've never seen anything. And if you do support that, then if the Trump government again denies, or even some big bank, what if some a Christian becomes the CEO of some Chase or RBC or BMO, I don't know, and says, yeah, we're not gonna loan money to any religious groups aside from Christians. What if you're telling me you don't have a problem with that? And again, that's the classic tongue twister. They don't have a response for that, so they'll just resort to name calling and the stupid things that the left usually goes to. So again, that is something that we should be very concerned about in Canada. But again, um, most people, not obviously the people watching this are probably the exception to the rule, but most people are so brainwashed and so dumbed down that it's just in one ear out the other. They'll do anything CBC tells them to do. If their college professor tells them, they'll believe it. So um, take that for what you will. This is from Global News. Now, there's another one done in the States by CNN. And like I say, this is the prime example of the goalpost shifting. For starters, they say 67% of Canadians agree that Canada needs the ability to vaccinate before reopening. Now, there is infinite amount of reasons to question this. The first one being is that we may never get a vaccine. Again, SARS doesn't have a vaccine. AIDS doesn't have a vaccine. Again, I wasn't around, but apparently when the AIDS crisis was going on, people are saying, yeah, it's only a matter of time till we get a vaccine. And sure enough, whatever, 30 years later, we don't have a vaccine. Or yeah, I don't know when it was in the 80s exactly, but 30, 35 years ago, or 30, 35 years later, still no vaccine. So how do you? And then the other problem too is that how do you know if it's safe too? That's the problem that people assume vaccines are safe. The problem with a vaccine like this is that it's more than likely going to be rushed through, which means it's not going to have proper testing. Again, vaccines do not go through double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. None of them ever have. And I can't stand these people who always, like I say, I always use climate change as the example. If you don't have a mountain of evidence to back up your claims, being a climate skeptic, they'll laugh you out of the room. But yet they'll turn around and be like, "Yep, vaccines are safe," even though there's literally not one double-blind, placebo-controlled trial that shows its efficacy. So which one is it? Are studies a good thing or are studies not a good thing? Now again, the left they're big on science when it fits their agenda, and all of a sudden when it doesn't fit their agenda, all of a sudden science doesn't matter. And a lot of the science that they're big on isn't even proven science. So and the other thing too is that this is clearly a bias poll. Uh, Ipsos, I believe, is a Soros-funded organization. Not to mention too, when most of these polls they're very misleading. Again, we've seen with the assault rifle one where they didn't even define it even close to the proper terms. Who knows who they're actually polling? So again, and not to mention too, I guarantee you that if they probably won't do it because it blew up in their face when they did it for the gun one. The whole 52% of people support an outright gun ban, and then they did a poll, and all of a sudden 75% of people didn't want the gun ban. So again, which one? And that's Global's audience too. That is not a pro-gun bias audience by any means. So the polls are clearly made up. My guess is that in reality, there definitely is a decent percent of the population that does believe crap like this. But my guess it's probably pretty much the exact opposite, like the gun control one. Uh, so my guess is I would say about a third of Canadians are actually for something like this, but that's just because 99% of them are so economically and just flat out illiterate in general that they have no idea whatsoever about things. And they'll, like I say, they'll believe anything Global or CBC tells them. And if you look at through the comments here, the overwhelming majority of people do not are against it. In that, I don't know how exactly how many comments it has here, but it does have a lot of comments. In that, you look through almost all the top comments, there are people saying no. Like I don't see hardly anybody here defending the stance here. Like probably 90% of the response are people criticizing and saying no. So again, it's clearly a biased poll, and it's clearly and the reason why that these people support the lockdown, at least the politicians and the elites, is that they're not losing out on anything. If anything, they're gaining. They're making more money. Again, people sitting at home all day, they probably watch the news. A lot of people who didn't watch the news before. So of course they want to keep things locked down, and then they turn around and call you selfish again. Most of what the left accuses you of, you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're guilty of. So whenever the left accuses you of something, dig down and see if they're guilty of it. Most of the time they are. And when they accuse you of being selfish, again, it's just them being selfish because a lot of these people are they're benefiting more from the lockdowns than from reopening things. And like I said, there's no evidence to support their worldview. In that, like I say, the goalposts have shift from flatten the curve, we need to lock things down to flatten the curve, and then it's we need to flatten the curve a little bit more, and then it's we need to prevent against a second wave, and then people down the line just keep calling their BS, and now it's we need to wait for a vaccine again. Like, how far are you going to shift the goalposts here? Now, before we know it, it's going to be we need to go 10 years without a confirmed case in the entire world before we reopen. Like, that's where we're going to be at the end of this. So what is it going to take? Seriously. This is from Ted Cruz. Now, the Washington Examiner says a few Democratic senators are proposing a plan that would give most U.S. citizens $2,000 monthly. Now, again, that's almost 3,000 Canadian, depending on where the dollar's at. It's probably like 2,800, but that's a lot of money, especially for doing nothing. And Ted Cruz responds by saying, "Why stop there? Why only 2,000? Why not? Why exclude non-citizens or non-Americans? Why not send 100,000 a month every month to every single person on Earth?" And also prohibit them from working in the magical world of free money socialists. Why exactly wouldn't that work? Now again, this is one of the easiest ways to stump the socialists. Now again, they'll just trail off and come up with their usual stupid reasoning. But again, if the socialist free money policies and reasoning is a good policy and it actually makes sense, then why not more money? Why again? The argument against socialism and these leftist policies is you can't afford to spend that much money because you're spending more money than you're bringing in. And the only way to make it work is to go into massive deficits, to print money, that kind of stuff. And again, if that kind of stuff works, which again, socialists believe that works. Socialists, again, and they'll say, "Oh no, 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 we don't." Yeah, yes, you literally believe this because the only way to make it work is to go into massive amounts of debt. They'll say, "Oh, we can just tax the rich." Okay, well, if you raise the top tax bracket, their marginal tax rate to 90%, you still wouldn't even be able to fund the current spending. That was before the crisis too. Um, the current spending for a full year, I think it's like 7, 8 months. So a year goes by and all of a sudden you're broke. You'd have your socialist utopia for a year, if that. And that's just how bad it actually is. So again, socialists believe that the solution to the simple solution to people not having enough money is just to print more money and to tax people more. The problem is taxing people more. Well, guess what? All of a sudden they're having less and less money, which means less and less money to tax. So what do they do to fill the gap? Well, they just print more and more money. What happens when you print more and more money? The money isn't worth as much, which just leaves the poor just right back where they started. Because uh, if you increase the poor's wages by 10% and inflation goes up 10% and the cost of goods and services goes up 10%, they're right back where they started. And that's exactly why UBI won't work, is that if you just give people money, a certain percentage of the population will stop working. And the problem is that the price of the cheap labor will have to go up because people can choose between not working and getting $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month, or working and getting 1,500 or maybe just over 2,000, which means the only way you'll be able to get people to work the cheap jobs, the low rent jobs, and nothing against them, and I've worked them before, um, still work them to some degree. Um, the only way to do it would be to pay people a certain percent above the current rate, which means prices will have to go up to make up that difference. So that's one of the many problems of socialism, but like I say, one of the many. The last thing here is something that's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true to a degree in that it was all over the news about 2 months ago. There were kids partying on Florida beaches during spring break, and this guy says, Jeremy Boring, the kids partying on Florida beaches during spring break were right, and like I say, they were. They said things like, "Oh, we don't got nothing to worry about," stuff like that. Now, again, I don't agree with that whole party lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. It's to me, it's something that you definitely won't be happy. When you're in your 40s, your 50s, be like, "Man, I'm so happy that I, you know, partied, for weeks on end when I was, teens and 20s." I don't know anybody who's happy that they did that kind of stuff. The stuff you're happy about is the social interaction, and you don't need to be getting drunk and doing drugs to have the social interaction, at least if you ask me. So, like I say, those kids were right. Now, does that mean that they should have did it? Probably not. I'm not saying that they should have been doing that. I'm just saying they said that they don't have anything to worry about. In reality, they really don't, because the death rate for them is almost exactly the same. I believe if you're under 20, it's actually slightly lower than the flu. And like I said, the people comparing this to the flu 2, 3 months ago were mocked. And it turns out now that they're right to an extent. They're right for most of the population, aside from people who are if you're over the age of 60, then those are the only people that the death rate is really much more than the flu, especially if you're over like 70. So, this is something I wanted to bring up because this is where we're at. That the people that were the most wrong, that looked like the biggest idiots in the world 2 months ago, well, guess what? They were right, and I'm not saying I don't think they're 100% right, but they largely were right. Like they probably should have been able to do what they were doing, looking back on it. Um, so again, that's something I wanted to just to point out, just to kind of show just where we're at in that. Like I say, these crazy kids that were partying on during spring break were right. And like I say, it's just so crazy to think about, which is why I wanted to talk about it. And again, I don't know if a lot of people in Canada probably didn't come across it, but again, it was one of the biggest stories in the States at the time, if you remember it. And again, they were viciously mocked and being like, "Oh, you selfish a-holes, you're gonna get everybody sick." Um, and again, that brings it back to the people say, "Oh, how do you know they're not going to give it to their grandparents and stuff like that?" Well, yeah, if I was running things, I would have quarantined the grandparents. I would have quarantined the old. And we knew pretty much very early on that quarantining the old was the way to go. And like I said, the last thing to point out too is that the people criticizing the people who want to reopen, again, you have zero credibility whatsoever if you were in the borders don't work, masks don't work, you know, believing the WHO. If you're in that crowd, which again, most of the people who want to keep things closed were in that group, again, you have zero credibility whatsoever, but because of your BS virtue signaling policies, you're one of the big reasons why we're in this mess, not because of the people who want to reopen. So again, last thing I wanted to point out there. So I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email if you haven't already. Again, I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. Check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Again, you can see my profile here in the bottom left corner. Search me up and give me a follow. Again, I also have a link to it in the description. And last thing, as always, check me out on BitChute if you haven't already too.